This is not the outcome of AI that anyone wants.
The more interesting question today isn't whether China can build great products, it's whether China can build great brands.
This is, I think, where we've seen the biggest community grassroots reaction to AI, because it's where it impacts people the most, where they live.
Western brands are writing the PowerPoint whilst the Chinese brands are pouring the concrete and getting on with it.
You know, when it comes to the lack of transparency there, it goes much deeper than just the NDAs.
Hello and welcome to episode 116 of Disconnected. I'm your host, Jag Sharma, joined by my co-hosts Jason Kapadia in Dubai, Matt Webster in Rio de Janeiro, and special guest Blake Stonebanks in New York City. And together, we'll be delving into the world of AI tech and social media and how it's impacting society and culture. Coming up, Blake explains why some of the biggest battles in AI aren't happening in Silicon Valley or Washington, but in small towns fighting back against hyperscale data centers. We ask whether China's innovation problem is over and whether it's a real challenge now or something much harder, building global brands that people actually trust and care about. And we explore why AI might be turning marketing into a dirty word, as well as other trending topics. But before we start, allow me to introduce or reintroduce our special guest. Blake Stonebanks first appeared on Disconnected all the way back in September 2021 on episode 6, where he helped us myth-bust China's technology landscape and challenge many of the assumptions people held about innovation coming out of China. Since then, Blake has continued to build a reputation as one of the most thoughtful voices exploring the intersection of technology, society, governance, and global business. Having spent more than 2 decades living and working in China, Blake has helped some of the world's biggest brands define their voice and relevance in one of the most dynamic and competitive markets on earth. Fluent in Mandarin and deeply immersed in the Chinese market, he's built international teams across brand, CRM, social media, and innovation strategy. Today, he joins us to help unpack what happens when technology scales faster than trust, faster than institutions, and sometimes faster than democracy itself. Welcome back, Blake, to Disconnected.
Thanks, Jag. I've been waiting 5 years to come back. It feels good to be on Disconnected again.
Brilliant. Yes, the last time you were on, you were living in China. Now you're in New York and you're on the pod. The pod's developed a bit. Now we've got Jason, who's in Dubai, obviously, and Matt in Rio. So I'm excited for today. And you know what? Thanks, Blake, for joining us. I'm excited for what you're going to unpack with us today. Let's get straight into it. Let's get into our opening topic. Because for the last few years, most conversations about AI have focused on the software. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, the tools we're using every day. But AI isn't just software. It's physical infrastructure. It's data centers, it's power stations, it's water, it's land, and increasingly, communities around the world are asking a simple question. Who benefits from all of this and who pays the price? What's particularly interesting is that this pushback isn't coming from anti-technology activists. In many cases, it's coming from ordinary, everyday people who support innovation but want a seat at the table before decisions are being made. Blake, you recently wrote an excellent article on this topic, so why don't you help us understand what's happening?
Right. So I wrote an article for American Purpose, which is Frank Fukuyama's channel Inside Persuasion by Yasha Monk, that explores principles of, how liberal democracy is evolving. And one of the big debates, I think, that when I first started writing this piece that wasn't, being well covered by the media and is now extremely well covered by the media is the pushback against data centers being built in communities across the US. This is, I think, where we've seen the biggest community grassroots reaction to AI, because it's where it impacts people the most, where they live, the water they drink, the access they have to power, the amount that they will need to pay for taxes, for electricity, for resources in order to have a data center that they might not see any benefit from and might, in fact, see a lot of negative impacts from. So this is a piece that I wrote focused on Perry Village, Ohio, where no one knew except for this village council that had signed NDAs with province capital in order to get a contract to build a data center inside Perry that would cover about 20% of the land there. And it was built right next to people's home, or it would be built right next to people's homes, right next to the school baseball field. And people didn't want it there when they found out about it. People were very worried about it. And as soon as the story broke, there were protests outside the village council, and people moved to vote out the council members that had signed the NDAs and signed the contract with province capital. And it's an example of, I think, a trend we're seeing across the US, which is the debate about AI, how it plays out locally in local democracies, is proving actually not to be about what AI is doing so much in terms of business and in terms of jobs, which is what everyone was talking about for a long time, but actually about the democratic processes that are being undermined and the debates that are not happening because big tech and their partners are often signing very non-transparent contracts and deals with local governments. And I see this in New Jersey, all around me here. Everyone I talk to from Virginia, Ohio, Texas, they're fighting this not so much because they don't want data centers, but because they actually want the companies building the data centers to pay taxes, and they want to see a benefit in the community for allowing that hyperscale data center to go up in their town.
One thing that struck me while reading your article is that the AI race is increasingly being framed as a national competition, a competition amongst countries. The argument seems to be America must build more compute, America must build more data centers, America must win the AI race. And increasingly, the justification is because China's doing it. Blake, do you think that this narrative is just being used as a way of shutting down legitimate local concerns?
I mean, the big tech players are spending massively on PACs, on lobbying, on getting AI-friendly, data center-friendly officials elected. And when it comes to the debate in the US, the one message that has proven extremely effective and is supported by the vast majority of Americans is the need for America to lead AI. So that framing of America versus China is very effective in the US. I think it is disingenuous. If we want to talk about how America can compete better with China, there are a million ways America can compete better with China. I, for one, would rather us be investing in schools and education, in research. And I believe smarter people are going to be just as effective in competing against China as smarter computers. That being said, it's a legitimate argument, but when it comes to the need for America to lead AI, I think the opportunity is for us to lead in accountable AI, not AI that is just bigger, faster, and anti-democratic.
But isn't there a narrative with this AI race? It's certainly one that I feel a lot when I'm reading up about it. There's this feeling that if we don't get to open the Pandora's box of superintelligence first, then we will become slaves to the people that do own that superintelligence. You know, that kind of doomsday look where it's a bit like the nuclear arms race, where it's like who'll be able to pull the levers of ultimate power and threaten other democracies by the use of this intelligence. So that seems to be that seems to be pushing the momentum in a basic way. I love to educate people so that they can use AI more efficiently and everybody has a wonderful life. But on the flip side, if you're doing that and another competitor superpower is just racing towards some demonic super intelligence, then you're going to be afraid to miss out on that, aren't you? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think the nuclear arms race is an apt comparison, because what we're talking about, if we talk about like AGI and what Nick Bostrom kind of frames as the singleton, right? Like this idea that you can build an AGI so powerful that it essentially rules the world and nothing can compete with it. This is a little bit like the race to see who can drop the most bombs, right? Like this is not the outcome of AI that anyone wants. So does it matter to me if China builds that or America builds that? No, because I don't want that built. And I don't think China's AGI singleton would be any better or worse than America's. I also think that's kind of a little bit of, kind of one of these kind of like doomsday AI narratives that a lot of the AI players, I think, use in order to gain leverage with, really with the government. Is they frame this as essentially like a military arms race. And it's also, it's not just AI, right? It's not just about building data centers. Like, if you look at what China is doing in terms of its investments in artificial intelligence, it's investing heavily not just in building data centers, and I would argue probably doing so more responsibly and more environmentally sound than the US approach, but it's investing heavily in, embodied intelligence and robotics. It's investing heavily in, what we could talk about as a kind of like platform economy around technology, so that, China's strategy is, all right, we're going to build the world's strongest supercomputer, which was just announced, a couple days ago, Shine. China now has officially the world's strongest supercomputer, and it's built entirely with CPUs, no GPUs. It's built with Chinese chips. There's no NVIDIA in there. And what China wants to do is create kind of synergies between the various elements of intelligence, and it's going to invest in that. And I think the U.S. should do the same, but ultimately, I don't think that this is an argument about building data centers in the middle of towns and people's communities without democratic process. There's ways the U.S. is capable of leading AI and building this infrastructure without skirting democratic processes and responsibility.
One point about the point you're talking about in terms of the NDAs and secret deals that undermine democracy. But NDAs are standard in these big commercial real estate deals to try to avoid speculation and bidding wars, right? So locals did push back successfully via the referendum. So democracy did actually work in this case. So then why frame the routine process as uniquely broken or corrupt for data centers, but then not compare it to, say, other factories or warehouses that use the same system?
Yeah, I think the NDAs this is something that we should have transparency on across government. We should not have, at the very least, if there's no, kind of a military or security risk, we should have transparency on the NDA itself. So we should know what is being obfuscated from the public. Now, when it comes to, the specific example of Perry, for example, what concerns me is not just the NDAs. It's the fact that the neighboring governments did not know about this, did not know about the deal. It's the fact that they were calling these late night meetings to vote where they knew that people would not show up to have their voices heard or to hear what the dialogue was. So, when it comes to the lack of transparency there, it goes much deeper than just the NDAs. But I'm against the NDAs like across the board. We should have more transparency in government, not less. And I think that's especially true with a technology as transformative as artificial intelligence.
On the point of the kind of no benefits to communities, right, that you talked about, right? What about the construction jobs, property, income taxes, infrastructure upgrades? Those economic multipliers, I guess, exist, like if you see in the Virginia's model.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know that there are incentives that are quite generous, but zero benefits kind of ignores the trade-offs, I guess. What do you think?
So, I mean, like in the case of Perry, they have signed in like abatements on taxes for 15 years. All right. We don't know what that technology looks like in 15 years when they start paying taxes, when they start to pay for the environmental and community impacts that building the data center is going to have. Do I think that, they're going to make so much money from year 16 to year 30 on that data center in Perry that it would justify not collecting any money for 15 years? Absolutely not. I think that there's a million better things that they could do with that land that would build more revenue for the village than that data center. And again, I'm not anti-AI or anti-data center. I'm pro-AI. I'm pro-data center. I think these are good things. But I also believe, hey, if we want to build these, let's build them in a way that's accountable. I think accountable AI development is actually going to be faster in the long run, because if you try to scale past trust, rather than through it, rather than building trust with the people, you're generating more friction and you're slowing yourself down trying to save a few dollars. If Province Capital had gone in with their deal and had a conversation about what are the benefits that need to be on the table in order to get this built with Perry, they wouldn't have that friction. If Meta, in building or in basically, buying out the nuclear power plants that will power that data center, had, transparency about their roles in all of this, then there wouldn't be that friction there. So can we do this in an accountable way that actually lets America scale with trust rather than undermine that trust in American AI?
There's obviously tension here, or friction, as you just said, and Jag mentioned earlier who benefits and who pays, and that's what the crux of this story is. You've got residents who are worried about energy demand. You've got this Meta taking over, buying a whole nuclear power plant, water, land, visual impact. So it's a big kind of threat to infrastructure, especially if they don't know what's going on because the deals are being done late at night. But sorry to trivialize this slightly, but it kind of when I read this, it kind of reminds me of There Will Be Blood. It's like a 21st century version of There Will Be Blood, you've got Jason acting as Daniel Day-Lewis at the moment, and you've got Blake acting as Paul Dano, but in a much more considered, less emotional movie. But yeah, it does remind me of that. It's just like before, where you've got these powerful people coming in to take the land because there's oil underneath it, and there's money to be made. It's the same story. We're just in a different century.
Just one other point in terms of like the water claims. So as far as I know, most of the new data centers that are being built have this recirculating water, just like how you would have in a water-cooled PC, I guess, right? And I guess if you look at some of the studies I was just looking over, it's saying that like if it was water-intensive farmland, it would use up way more water than what they would on a data center if they were using like the older evaporative technology. So, if people knew that, okay, look, there's a certain amount of water that they need to bring in, but then it's kind of recirculated and just takes the heat away and cools down outside. And so my main thing is that like, maybe it's just the articles that I'm reading and, maybe a lot more pro data center compared to some others, but like, is the tech really taking things away? I mean, in terms of the nuclear point you were talking about, Meta's deal is kind of extending the nuclear life and adding capacity to the grid, right? So not just privatizing it exclusively. And, obviously this is like zero carbon power as well being added or, being funded, right? So, my main thing is, okay, on the water point and then, evidence that it causes blackouts and broader grid issues. Is that actually happening in the States right now? I'm not sure. It's hard to gauge from this side.
Yeah. So, talking to the people in Perry, what I heard is they already struggle with blackouts. They already struggle with their grid. And when we talk about water, yes, all of the big tech players, as they build their data centers, are talking about what's called closed loop, which is this idea the water recirculates. However, I think this is a bait and switch. And the deal in Perry, while it's framed as closed loop, they're talking about 200,000 gallons of water per day. So 200,000 gallons of water per day is not closed loop by any measure. So they're using the terminology, but they're not committing to it. So yes, if they did what they said they were going to do when they kind of stand up and speak to the city council, sure, there's going to be less water usage than there would be for farmland. But when you actually look at what they put in the contracts, no, that's not the case. And then when you look at the fact that they're actually not really held even to that 200,000 gallons of water per day, it's a very scary reality that they can build the data center and say, hey, it just wasn't economically feasible to limit us to 200,000 gallons of water per day. So we'll pay some fine here or there for exceeding that. And when the reason that water is for cooling, right? And they add PFAs and like PFOs to the water in order to have it go through the system more smoothly. And when that water is pushed out of the data center, it's full of PFAs and PFOs. And these are the forever chemicals that will pollute that farmland and all of the neighboring farms, and they will not be able to, grow safe food in the future. So I think that's scarier than a farm.
One thing I learned from this that I wasn't expecting to learn was a better understanding of how lobbying works in US politics. Now, I looked a bit more into it just for my own understanding, because you talk about PAC or super PAC spending, I think is mentioned somewhere in there. And so the three buckets of political influence: lobbying, paying lobbyists to meet politicians, campaign contributions, we're supporting this candidate. And then the whole PAC thing was super interesting to me because it's basically funding organizations that spend money to influence elections. So if lobbying is trying to influence the referee, PAC spending is helping to choose who the referee will be.
Exactly.
And so that was interesting learning for me on this. And, because I don't think we're talking about technology anymore. I think this is a politics story because, Meta alone allocated 65 million this year to support AI-friendly politicians. The broader technology sector spent more than 100 million on lobbying last year. And of course, lobbying figures don't include PAC figures, PAC spending, funding the organizations that influence elections. So it's, my view on it is that this kind of at some point stops being a technology story and it's a power story. It's a power play story. It's a politics story.
100%. And yeah, so that's 65 million that Meta is investing this year in 4 super PACs, and they're playing both sides of the aisle. One PAC is dedicated to Democrat. One PAC is dedicated to Republicans. And that 65 million doesn't include lobbying dollars. It doesn't include any of their government relations people, any of their legal people. That's basically strictly on PAC campaigns. So they're investing heavily in state elections. That's $100 million basically just for state campaigns to reach voters and to try and move the needle in support of Meta's AI infrastructure among voters. I don't think political lobbying really builds trust. I think it does win elections, but what I would love to see them do is spend that $100 million on initiatives that actually build trust with the people that they are going to impact with the data centers. Like, what also kind of frustrates me about all of this is, they're going to spend 100 times more on campaign ads than they would spend on taxes to pay back the communities for those data centers. They're spending this money to avoid really paying the taxes and paying, back the communities. So that's, I think a systemic problem in America's democracy is that in a heavily financed, campaign-driven democracy, often those with the most money get their people elected. And I mean, we see that, and certainly in the White House and, across now increasingly state and local, where, kind of like the Peter Thiels and whatnot are really able to choose who are going to be the leaders because they have the money to invest in that. So the lobbying piece is scary because to me, it's just so wasteful. If we were spending that 100 million and that 65 million on accountable AI, on building AI infrastructure in a way that communities are going to welcome it, I think we could do that efficiently.
But Blake, wait. What about the beautiful ballroom? You're not thinking about the big picture here. The beautiful ballroom.
Yeah, and the UFC fights on the lawn.
Once that gets built with the help of the tech companies who are actually lobbying as part of this eyebrow-raising amount of politics that I was reading into it, they're actually putting people in place who are close to Trump and giving money directly to the construction of this ballroom. It's unbelievable because apparently this is one of the president's priorities. And if you help him with his priority, he'll help you with your data center in Perry, Ohio and other places. It's incredible.
100%. And that makes me, skeptical. Like when we talk about that debate between is AI investment necessary so that America leads, AI and can build AGI before China. It honestly, the way that's happening right now, it doesn't make me feel more confident in, an American AI future than a Chinese AI future. Ask, I think, people who've lived in America and in China, which system, they would want to be like, kind of run by AI. And I don't think people are going to say, oh, 100% America. If you've experienced both countries, I don't think you feel, most people I talk to at least don't feel that this, kind of AI, AGI future is one that is better led by the Pentagon and kind of there will be oil democracy over one that is, a little bit more focused on building more of a consensus across, multiple players and countries and in terms of how it gets built.
Spreading fear and xenophobia seems to always win out. I got my undergraduate degree from the States. I have friends that I've kept in touch with. Florida, so not a typical, maybe I'm not going to say it covers all, represents everyone in the US, but just some of the comments from some of my friends there or ex-student friends there with regards to China. It just shows that how much can be driven from emotional decision making. You've got me on a bit of a downer, Blake, so I'm going to cut that topic there because I think we'll just spiral down and we'll end up talking about Jason's best friend, the world's first trillionaire, which I don't want to. So we're going to move on. And do you know what? Let's move on to a brighter topic about innovation, because one of the things I found fascinating over the last decade, especially over the past 8 years living touching distance to mainland China, is how the conversation around China has changed. 15 years ago, the conversation was, can China innovate? Can China create original products? Can China move beyond manufacturing? Today, I think most of those questions have been answered. China produces some of the world's most advanced EVs, some of the world's best drones, some of the world's most sophisticated battery technology, some genuinely world-class consumer electronics. The more interesting question today isn't whether China can build great products, it's whether China can build great brands. Blake, you spent like 2 decades watching Chinese companies up close. So take us through it. What exactly is the China brand gap?
Right. This, I think, is the biggest gap China faces as it tries to push into Western markets. It's not that they don't have great products. I think everyone knows that China builds many, if not most, of the world's best products. The gap is they don't have trust abroad, especially in the West. And in particular, the enterprises that are looking to build in the West aren't building strong brands. So, while China builds many of the world's best products, it only has 3 of the world's top brands, according to the Interbrand Best Global Brands kind of index. And those brands are all in the bottom 20% of that 100 list. So I think Xiaomi is like around 81, and then BYD is in there, and Huawei is close to the bottom, which is, a bit ridiculous because Huawei just isn't really present in the West due to a lot of the geopolitical tensions. And I do think that there are great Chinese brands. I think DJI is one of them. I think Bamboo Labs is probably one of them. I think Anker is one of them. I think there are some very strong players in Shenzhen who have a deep understanding of brand, having seen how DJI developed its success in the West. But when I'm listening to Wang Chuanfu, he's the CEO of BYD, and other leaders, particularly in automotive, talk about how, let's say, like BYD is going to be the world's #1 automaker in the next 5 years, I'm skeptical that it's going to successfully build a brand and build trust and drive the sales that it's talking about. in the West. I don't see it happening now. I see an incredibly botched European market entry, especially in Germany by BYD. And, when I look at the legacy of brands that, were supposed to do very well in the West, including Xiaomi, but, a lot of these smartphone players like Oppo, for example, or OnePlus, I see these same mistakes being made over and over, that they believe they can lean on product and price and not build trust and not stand for something in the markets. And especially in a category like automotive, that is such a personal purchase decision. It's very emotional. When you choose a car, you're not just saying, hey, this is a purely functional utility for me. It's an expression of who I am. If I'm buying a BYD in Germany and they don't have the infrastructure for maintenance and repair that you would expect for that price of vehicle, when they're slashing their prices by 50% within a few months of market entry, what does that say about me if I'm going to buy a BYD and all of a sudden I look like an idiot because I could have bought it for half the price a few months later, and now I probably can't resell it for anything. So I believe that China needs to look very closely at those brands that are successful in the West. They need to look very closely at Shenzhen, because this should be China's moment. They've been investing in new energy and new energy vehicles and machine vision and autonomous driving for well over a decade, for 2 decades. And they're stumbling over themselves because they have not taken into account what it means to build trust and kind of a distinctive brand positioning in the Western markets they're looking to enter.
At some point, consumers need a reason to care, specifically about the brand. And, you mentioned it, especially in emotional categories like automotive, which is an emotional category, that matters enormously. Cars aren't rational purchases, they're identity purchases. What you shared about BYD, I watched their brand hero film or whatever it was from 2024. Shocking, and because their CEO said that they'll become the world's largest car manufacturer within 5 years. Yeah, it's an incredible ambition. But, when we look at BYD's global marketing, I'm struggling to understand what that brand stands for beyond being Chinese and being electric. And I think that's part of the challenge.
100%. And they have come into the European market saying, we're the Chinese EV that you've heard so much about. And hey, the product is good and it is at a reasonable price point, but it doesn't have the infrastructure that you really expect for an automotive brand in that market. And it just doesn't really stand for something. Like, I'm the Chinese EV that's not a positioning. It's a problem because there are 8 other Chinese EV brands entering that market, and now Canada has 6 Chinese EV brands looking to enter this year. And they need to figure out what they stand for, because I think while in China, people have a little bit more of a sense of the difference between these brands. Even in China, it's very, very product driven. China is a market that doesn't have a lot of brand loyalty. It moves with kind of very, let's say short-term trends, and it can be very product driven, very influencer driven. So for a new brand to come into a market without any kind of story and even a visual aesthetic, for example, that is consistent, people don't know what to make of it. And that can work on Amazon, where you're competing only on price for a functional product. It can't compete, and it can't work in any category that is driven by brand and identification with the consumer.
I was back in my home city of Cardiff last week, and there's a couple of BYDs on the road. And interestingly, locally in that city, the joke going around for BYD is that it stands for Bring Your Data, which, it comes back to, it kind of links partly to what we were talking to previously about, xenophobia and attitudes towards China. But that doesn't translate across all brands. You mentioned DJI. They fascinate me because I think DJI is one of the first Chinese technology brands that genuinely cracked the global brand equation. People don't buy DJI because it's Chinese and it's technology. People buy DJI because it's DJI. And I think that's a tremendous achievement and potentially a blueprint.
Yeah. And, DJI faces all of these barriers that, other Chinese tech players face. They can't have military contracts. Some of their products can't come into the US, for example. They should have all of that pushback, but they don't have it from consumers. They only have it from the government. And, it's similar. I think both the AI conversation and the Chinese brand conversation really come down to trust building. By the time Western consumers encountered DJI, the brand and its products had already proven themselves. People were so excited to get their hands on a drone that had that image stabilization and was able to make these compelling, like what traditionally was only done with helicopters, these very cinematic images and videos, all this aerial photography. It was just wonderful. And that was like the brand spirit. People got it. I don't know if DJI stumbled on what they had with their brand because of the great product they built. I kind of think they did. And then they were like, oh, this is doing well. We're going to work with creators. We're going to kind of build, this creative technology brand that is focused on aerial photography. But it was a brand and it was unique in the market and people knew exactly what DJI was. BYD has definitely not done that work yet.
What do you think that Western companies should steal from this new Chinese competition that's coming?
So for me, the biggest gap is not in the company. It's in the government. And China works in 5-year plans where they decide, all right, these are the areas where we're going to invest in order to develop a competitive advantage and leadership in a way that's, kind of complementary with other key categories in China so that we can become the leader in NEV. We can become the leader in drones. We can become the leader in machine vision. And the US really doesn't do that. The US really kind of works by that lobbying and that pack. It's like, all right, hey, I'm a company with a lot of money. I want to get this done. What politicians do I have to, fund to make that happen? So, I think number one, what the West needs to learn is we need to be actually strategic about our investments. And like when we look at AI, for me, like, I love the conversations happening because it's comical the way it kind of undermines political expectations in the US. So like, and sorry to go back to AI, I'll get back to brands, Chinese brands shortly. But right now, like one of the big conversations around AI in the States is, should there be government stake in the AI companies? And, this is something Sam Altman has been pushing with Trump since the first week Trump was in office, since the very first week Trump was in office. And it's something, I think most of the AI players, kind of support. But more than anything, it's kind of cross aisle where we have Bernie Sanders advocating for 50% of American AI, kind of like revenues or, profits to be shared, like with the US. And on the other side of the aisle, Steve Bannon is asking for exactly the same thing. Like, who would have thought Steve Bannon and Bernie Sanders would be bedfellows on American AI strategy? But, like looking at what they're asking for me, it's reminds me more of like China 30 years ago. It seems very much like a kind of state-owned enterprise approach that is only going to create huge conflicts of interest and only going to slow down AI development. It seems very much like a very backward move. I want the US to learn from Chinese government investment in technology and environmental new energy, where China is building its AI data centers in the ocean, where cooling is much easier when you use the ocean as a heat sink, where they're building AI data centers in the middle of the Gobi Desert and finding new ways to cool them and power them only with wind energy. So China is finding solutions here. I think it's able to do that because of, kind of like the hegemonic, leadership system there, where they don't have, like debates the same way the West does. But, like ultimately, we need to be strategic about our investments. And if we're not, then, we're already kind of like handing, half the globe to Chinese leadership. And that's CCP leadership. Like when China is putting its AI into the infrastructure in Indonesia and Malaysia and, like across the East, that's happening because of a gap in US leadership and Western leadership. It didn't have to be that way. And they continue to invest in a way that sets them up for future success. It sets their companies up for future success, and the U.S. is only thinking about like the next election 2 or 4 years ahead. So that's first and foremost. Let's come back to the brand question, because I feel like I just talked for a long time. Maybe you have some thoughts on the investment piece.
No, I think you're totally right in terms of the way China is approaching things. It's on a much longer horizon, and you have to trust in the leadership if you're Chinese to secure the prosperity of the future of the country. And when you look at China versus, say, the States, it's like chalk and cheese, right? It's like the West is always arguing, and I guess that's the downside of democracy is, you spend most of the time fighting and nothing gets done, whilst these other guys are, pushing ahead at light speed. And just two different approaches for sure. But yeah, onto the brand piece. What do you think?
So like on the brand piece, what China does, I think, very effectively is it has, like the government leading that big investment piece that drives disruptive innovation and leadership. And the companies are very much taking an iterative, fail fast, learn fast approach to innovation. So, like if you look at WeChat, right, which is, I think, Jag, when we first met, working together on some China marketing projects like 8 years ago, we called it like the OS of China. And I think that's exactly kind of what it is for most people. WeChat started as a WhatsApp clone, right? China has, copycatted a ton of technologies, but those foundations are not what made any of their products great. What made their products great was how quickly they iterated. And their approach to innovation is very much, let's test it, let's get it into market, see what works, see how we make it better. And the US approach is, I think often, let's plan this out. Let's, set up all of our chess pieces exactly as we want them to be, and then, surprise everyone with this really cool thing. And that, I think, is just not the way the world works anymore. We have to be a little bit more transparent about what we're working on. We have to kind of share and get feedback in real time. And, that means that there maybe need to be more freemium models and, models where, hey, the beta is going to be at a much lower price and we're going to see if it works. We're testing it. But ultimately, let's get it into market very quickly and test and iterate, because America doesn't have a great system for iterative innovation. It speaks to it, but it doesn't implement it, at least not the way Chinese brands do. So I've been, working on this consultancy that focuses on helping Chinese brands build their brand foundations, brand stories, and, visual identity adaptation for Western market entry. And looking at some of the brands that have reached out to me and that I've met with, I've been shocked, even having lived in China for so long, how many products they have. So I'll talk to a company and they're like, yeah, we make breast pumps and looking to do, more of a push in the US to drive D2C. And I'll be like, yeah, that makes sense. You can't be Amazon forever. Let's take a look at the products. And they'll be like, okay, these are the 250 SKUs or something like this. And I didn't know there were this many breast pumps in the world, and especially from one brand. So China makes just a ton of products. These companies make so many products. And I think, your hero products are very important because they tell people what your brand is about. But we don't need to be so precious that we don't test and try new things. And the US speaks to that. You can read a ton of books about entrepreneurship and innovation and how to build your MVP. It's there, but it's not actually lived out. The test fast, fail fast, learn fast kind of ideology is lip service mostly, I think, in the US.
I agree. It's like Western brands are writing the PowerPoint whilst the Chinese brands are pouring the concrete and getting on with it. And that could be cultural, could be because they're taking too much time to argue back and forth. I've worked with Chinese brands and with Western brands, and I do see a lot of, they're just frozen due to a committee. This is the Western brands, some of them that I work with, and on one that I'm speaking to now, they need to make decisions. They know where they are and where they need to get to, but they spend so much time making decisions that they never get to where they're going to go to. Then on the flip side, I worked with a Chinese food brand for many years, and they were just constantly, we need to do a campaign, we need to do kind of tactics, let's do some tactics. We need to tell people about where our oysters that create our oyster sauce live. And it's like, that's great, and that's a great budget, but in my opinion, it's a waste of money because the Westerners that you're selling your product to don't know you and don't know what oyster sauce is or what they should do with oyster sauce. And they would nod along and listen and then say, okay, thanks. Anyway, here's a huge budget to go and film some oysters in the ocean, make a film about that. So they're not spending lots of time thinking about my advice. They're taking it on board and they're just doing it anyway. And then that didn't work, so let's do another one. But a Western food brand would have spent way less money and probably would have taken a short amount of time to get their products into the hands of the consumers. They were just obsessed, this particular example of this food brand, just obsessed with their heritage and talking about things that their audience in China would like, but they were in the UK and it was the European head office, and they were just cutting and pasting.
That's the brand gap.
Yeah, there it is.
So, yeah, for 20 years, I think the West was asking, can China build world-class products? But today, I guess the question is for China, can they build world-class brands? And speaking of brands, guys, let's move on to our third and final topic, and let's make this one a quick one. And let's move on to marketing, because one of the most interesting conversations Blake and I had before the recording was about whether AI is slowly turning marketing into a bad word. This topic hits quite close to home for me because I spent most of my professional life working in social media and marketing and digital marketing and all of that. And I've noticed recently a growing tension. Marketeers are being told to embrace AI, champion AI, use AI, scale with AI, become more efficient with AI. And at the exact same time, we're watching parts of our profession being automated away. Blake, when we spoke, you said something that really struck with me. You said that marketing is becoming a bad word. What did you mean by that?
So I see this very much as I have many friends who are entering their own entrepreneurship phase in life, and they don't feel comfortable marketing because they feel it's very kind of sleazy and we're trying to manipulate people rather than build trust with them. But you have to let people know who you are. You have to let people know about your products if they're going to buy them. Marketing has to exist. It really exists at every layer of business. But it has become a bad word because it stands for manipulation. It stands for, being dishonest with people. I don't think that is what marketing is, but people feel that. And I think that's come largely, or it's been exacerbated in recent years as marketing has switched from kind of campaign-driven, big idea creative that people are excited about to ad stalking and personalization and, influencers, every third swipe on your social media who you've never seen in your life trying to sell something to you. It's really become much more of like what we could consider like a kind of interruption in your everyday life that makes people feel uncomfortable because they know they're being targeted and they know these companies are trying to manipulate them. And I think you mentioned to me, Jag, that, increasingly you see people framing marketing roles not as marketing, but, maybe as growth or, taking some piece of marketing and saying leads gen lead or something like this, rather than what in the past would have been defined as a marketing role is now being defined in new ways because these roles are not as attractive as they were just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, completely. Everything's about growth now. Growth here, growth there. Or you've got to be an AI specialist. And yeah, on the whole AI thing, I've noticed a trend here, not just through people that I know and, friends and, professional acquaintances, that downsizing of the workforce within marketing teams because of, the introduction of AI. And yes, AI makes things dramatically cheaper. Everybody can create, everybody can publish, everybody can produce. Attention feels more expensive than ever, really. And paradoxically, it seems that, even standing out has become even harder. Is AI to blame here? Do we think that AI is increasing the value of creativity, or is it just commoditizing it?
So AI means so many different things, and there's so many layers, right? Like most of us feel like AI is new because we're talking about generative AI and LLMs. Now, when we talk about AI in marketing, that's been around ever since like Amazon recommendation systems 20 years ago. Like what I think AI is promising within the marketing world is what we might call like generative personalization at scale. And this is the, idea that we can feed ads to you that are personalized to you and use AI to, generate, maybe change the person, change the weather, change the color of the vehicle in a way that we know is going to appeal more to you. And I think for that dream of generative personalization at scale, that is going to have an uncanny valley effect on customers because they know that they're being targeted. They know that this is being kind of like tweaked to manipulate them. But fundamentally, I think it also comes back to that brand question, which is we see the brand being diluted because marketers think a brand can mean different things to different people. And that's not why people choose brands. It's not because, hey, you said what I wanted to hear. It's because you are what you are. And if AI takes away that trust and belief in what a brand actually stands for, then marketers have used AI in exactly the opposite way that they should be using it.
When you're talking about brands, being a little bit too over personal and providing too much information, the uncanny valley effect, it reminds me of ChatGPT when it just became sycophantic and everybody was like, stop telling me I'm amazing, this is weird, off I'm going to Claude.
One of the weird things that I've noticed about being in Dubai, I'm not sure if it's, similar where you guys are, but maybe about a year and a half ago, I started seeing AI ads on the billboard, meaning like a generated image, and it was so blatant, and then it would bring up a discussion with friends saying, oh, look, did you see that? Because it would be on the main highways that we'd be driving past. But now, okay, it's just my personal observation, but around 30% of all of the visuals with people in them are generated by AI. And I can tell because just, you can just still tell, but it's become so normal here now that like no one comments on it anymore. It's like everyone expects these billboards to be generated by AI anyway. And it seems like a lot of people here have embraced it, and everyone who I talk to in marketing fields are, they're using AI in as much as they can in terms of doing that kind of generation of images and copy as well. But I mean, in terms of talking about it in the negative, do you think that this is just something that's like are we in between phases here between that it's actually like a negative for a small amount of time and then it's going to kind of shift positive for founders that you're talking about that are using AI and thinking it's negative?
AI definitely has its uses, right? And obviously it's more efficient and cheaper to build an image with AI rather than pay for the production and the shoot and everything. But people still feel it. And I also think that there's just an emotional layer where, for me, having this conversation and talking to real people, it's much more exciting to me than talking to Claude. I could have this conversation with Claude. Claude could study you, Jason, and learn to say everything that Jason says. But emotionally, I'm not going to have that same connection as I do knowing that there's like a subjective experience and intelligence and, a person who's, grown up and traveled across the world and, experienced love and loss and everything that goes into human experience. Like, it's a fundamental emotion of human connection that I don't think AI is going to deliver. It's always going to be closer to pornography than love. It's always going to be a little bit artificial and lack the human center. It will do amazing things. But what excites me about AI is when we're using it as a tool. And we know when Jason tells me, hey, I built this using AI, and this is why I built that. That is why I get excited about AI. It's not because AI can talk to me and fake things for me. It's because a human used this as a tool to express something or to solve a problem or get something into the world that they thought should be there. So that's my hope, is we learn to think of AI as a human tool rather than a substitute for human connection.
Completely. I completely share that hope as well. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Blake. The brands that win, I think, won't be the ones with the most AI. They'll be the ones that know where not to use it. And you know what, Blake, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we'll wrap up there. We covered a lot, jam-packed episode. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for coming back on Disconnected and joining us for a second time. This will be another golden episode for the archives. So thank you. Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Matt. Always a pleasure. And thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, leave a review. And you know what? Even tell somebody about Disconnected. This has been episode 116 of Disconnected, and we'll see you on the next one.